So I'm just going to talk about what kombucha is, kind of the basic history, and like why it's good to incorporate it in your diet, and I'll just tell you basics if you want to try to make your own. And then feel free. We'll keep this loose and casual. If you guys just want to ask questions about anything, we'll just go for it. We'll just keep it simple. So this right here is a kombucha culture. If you can see this like white little ring down the bottom, it's kind of thick, so it's maybe like half an inch thick. It's more of a thicker one. So kombucha is a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. So an acronym for that is SCOBY. You sometimes hear that term. And then people also call it like a mother culture. So you see that in apple cider vinegar sometimes, that it has a mother culture in there. That's just referring to that, like that original culture that creates the fermentation process. So with kombucha, you have yeast, which eat sugar. And when yeast eat sugar, they release carbon dioxide and alcohol, which is how we get fermented beverages that are alcoholic. And the bacteria in kombucha feeds on the alcohol created by the yeast. So there's this symbiotic relationship between the yeast and the bacteria, because the yeast feed the bacteria, and the bacteria provide protection for the yeast. That's why this thick layer develops and it protects the yeast. So let's see, I was going to try to yank this guy out, because he's gross and disgusting and weird, and it's just fun to look at things like that. That's why I was just washing my hands. So those strands on the bottom there are strands of yeast, if you can see them. And then, like I said, this guy's pretty thick, and when kombucha is brewing, it normally just floats right on the top of liquid, just like that. And so down below you'll get yeast developing and fermenting, and like the bacteria conglomerates at the top, and that's why it becomes thick like that. So yeah, that's a SCOBY. Every time you make kombucha, the mother culture gives birth to a daughter culture. So you kind of have the mother eventually will sink down, and the daughter grows on top, and you now have two kombucha cultures. So you can now make 2 batches of kombucha next time you do it. And then you can make 4, and then you can make 8, and on and on. So that's part of the reason why this business got started, because I had all these kombucha SCOBYs and I didn't want to get rid of them. And so I just kept brewing more and more kombucha, and then it turned into this. Cool. Has everybody tried kombucha? Awesome. I'll start like sampling out some flavors as I talk too. So over here in the corner, I've just grabbed everything that you would need to make kombucha, which is super simple. It's really just tea and sugar, and then you add the culture to it to create the fermentation process, and you just let it sit. So as far as ingredients go, that's all you need is water, sugar, tea, and then a culture to get started. So it takes about 2 weeks for kombucha to ferment fully. If you take a gallon of water, you add a cup of sugar to it, and over the course of 2 weeks, the yeast eats up just about all the sugar that's in there. So you end up with a low sugar, high bacteria, or high probiotic food when you're done. I'll just pour. This is like some of the original kombucha, which doesn't have any fruits or herbs added. So I'll just start passing some of these around. So then the benefit of drinking kombucha is putting good bacteria in your system. Susan?
We have to skip a moment.
Everyone's stomach has to have a certain amount of bacteria in it for everything to function properly and to absorb nutrients from your food. So things that are detrimental to the good bacteria are things like antibiotics and sometimes prescription drugs, but even if you drink excessively or smoke excessively, you can decrease the ability for your body to maintain that good bacteria. Original kombucha. Grab one more. Yeah. So by keeping your gut or your stomach, balanced with beneficial bacteria, you just maintain overall good health. You good? One more? Yeah. Do you guys like the flavor overall? So like kombucha, they all have that vinegar tone to them. And then you can do the different flavors, and I'll pass out some more later. Yep. Yeah.
How long? You have to wait. Of course, you wait 2 weeks, but what if you let it in for 4?
Yeah. So over time, the kombucha just keeps fermenting.
And
so,
more effervescence? Is there more effervescence
yeah.
as time goes on?
Yep. So there's two sides to the coin. So it just keeps eating more and more sugar, and the pH keeps dropping. So instead of having a kombucha beverage, you would now have kombucha vinegar.
Okay.
So you can drink 4 to 16 ounces of kombucha at a time easily, but you can't really handle 16 ounces of vinegar.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it just becomes more acidic
Yeah.
kind of tasting.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then as far as carbonation, you have to trap the carbonation somehow in order for it to build up. So when you ferment kombucha, you would use a cloth covering, so that way it protects the kombucha, protects it from the dirt and dust from getting in, but it also provides an escape for the carbon dioxide. Because if this was an airtight seal and you let it sit for 2 weeks, you'd get so much carbon dioxide building up, either the lid would shoot off or the glass would break. So then when you have kombucha in a bottle, once it's finished fermenting with the main fermentation process, if you add fruit or a little bit more sugar to it and then cap it, leave it at room temperature, the yeast will keep fermenting, and then you have carbon dioxide building up inside the bottle, and that's how you get fizzy kombucha. Yeah. So our kombucha tends to be on the mild side. I personally just like lower effervescent, more smooth and mild kombucha, and so that's just the kombucha that I make. It seems like a lot of kombucha that is available, it tends to be on the sharper, more effervescent side, and those are just 2 different ways to do it. So if you like alcoholic cider, you can have hard or you can have sparkling or still hard cider. And some people prefer sparkling, some people prefer still. And then there's just different, you taste different things from each one, and it's just a different style of brewing.
2 things. If you kept that cloth off, would that become more like effervescent?
If it kept the cloth off?
Right, because you said that holds the CO.
No, so the cloth allows the carbon dioxide to escape.
Yeah,
because
but
it's not airtight.
What if you want it more effervescent though?
Yeah, like I said, you need a way to trap it. So you would do that by doing the primary fermentation and having have it become kombucha and not just sweet tea. And then once it's finished, you cap it and let it sit again at room temperature, and the carbon dioxide will build up.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then how much do you recommend drinking a day? Like an 8 ounce
so
amount?
usually you need about 4 ounces to get enough of it at once to get some beneficial effects. And people tend to drink 4 to 16 ounces a day, depending on what they want to do. So if you have lots of fermented foods in your diet already and you just want to add kombucha to it, you could have a few ounces. Some people like to drink kombucha when they're sick because of the enzymes in it and the bacteria to help give them an immune boost, and they would have a couple bottles for a few days. So in my opinion, it's always important to have fermented foods and probiotic foods in your diet on a regular basis. So whether or not you drink kombucha every day or get it somewhere else, it's a good rule of thumb. Yeah.
Can you use honey instead of sugar?
You cannot. So kombucha eats cane sugar, which is a simple sugar, as opposed to a complex sugar, which is like normally when you brew beer, you would use barley or oats or things like that have a complex sugar. So honey is not harmonious with kombucha bacteria, and it would kill it, and the yeast wouldn't be able to eat the sugar properly. However, there's a cousin to kombucha called Jun, J-U-N, and that one eats honey. And for whatever reason, Jun is able to handle the antimicrobial properties of honey and can keep fermenting. And Jun, you only use green tea, and it's a very light and effervescent type fermented beverage. So yeah, if you want to do kombucha, you have to use tea, whether white, green, or black, and sugar.
I've heard that you can do a secondary fermentation, especially if you use like a fruit juice or something like that. Is that what you've got there, or is that different?
So yeah, so this would be, this is just kombucha, so that'll be like a primary fermentation.
Right.
So there's 2 ways to do secondary fermentation. So the way that I do it for even doing the scale that I do, I would just take this culture out of the jar and you would set it aside, and you can add your fruit and your herbs right to the kombucha in that jar and let it sit again for however long you want. So I do about 3 days for my secondary fermentations, and that's enough time for the flavors to mingle. And when you add fruit, for the secondary fermentation, like blueberries or strawberries, you're adding sugar to the kombucha, so now the yeast have another food source, so it keeps fermenting. Or you can pour your kombucha that's fermented into a bottle and add fruit or herbs right to the bottle. And especially if you like fizzy kombucha, you can cap it once you put the fruit in there and then let it build up, and you'll get really effervescent kombucha.
So how long would you wind up then putting it into a bottle, capping it at shelf stable for?
Yeah, for a secondary ferment, from what I've done, usually it takes 2 to 5 days. But and like I said, I do 3-day is what the rhythm that I've gotten into. So I like doing a 3-day secondary fermentation.
And then you usually keep it, I've been told by some people they do it in their basement, but is it because it has to be temperature controlled or light controlled? Or?
Yeah, so UV light kills bacteria, and kombucha has bacteria in it, so you want to keep kombucha dark while you're brewing it to protect the bacteria. And then the warmer it is, the more active the yeast and the bacteria are. So if you have your kombucha in like a 60-degree environment versus an 80-degree environment, the 80-degree kombucha is going to ferment almost twice as quickly than when it's cooler. So I keep mine between 75 and 80 degrees in order to get the right turnaround times. So yeah, generally speaking, 70 to 80 degrees is a good temperature range if you want to brew kombucha. And so then once you're done with your kombucha and you've got to the point that you want, then you refrigerate it in order to slow down the bacteria and the yeast, and so that you can maintain that same flavor and effervescence level. Yeah.
So you remove the SCOBY after the first fermentation then you're going to do the second fermentation.
Yes. Yep.
But it still ferments without the SCOBY being in there?
Yeah, yep, and even though there's no solid SCOBY in here, you still get benefits from kombucha. Simply because the culture, the yeast and bacteria permeate the entire liquid solution or the whole beverage. So even though you remove the solid culture from it, you still have enough yeast and bacteria in there that it's what we call inoculated, and it will keep reproducing. So actually, if I took this culture out of this jar and put it in another one, and just let this keep sitting here, another culture would begin to grow in this one and re-solidify. Like kombucha never stops reproducing, and it never stops doing its thing. So like it's relentless. It just keeps growing. So yeah, even if you have just liquid kombucha, like a bottle of original kombucha from any company that you get, you can take original kombucha and have it and use it as your starter. So you could actually just pour in 2 bottles of this into a gallon of sweet tea, and it would take longer to ferment because you're using a weaker starter basically, but you just give it more time and the liquid will turn into a solid eventually, and you'll have your own culture.
What about the type of tea? Now, do you use loose tea, or do you use tea bags?
Yep, either way. So, like I have a bag of loose tea here. I use loose tea just because I use so much of it. And then there's about 2 grams of tea per bag. So you use about 8 to 12 grams of tea for making a gallon of kombucha. So rule of thumb is about 5 bags of tea if you want to make a gallon of kombucha. And you have to use tea. So that would be white, green, or black tea, which is all the same tea. Just white tea is the least oxidized, and black tea is the most oxidized. Or you can use oolong tea, because that's also part of the tea family. But if you want to use something like rooibos or lemongrass tea or herbal tea blend, those actually aren't teas because they don't have tea leaves in them. They're just called teas. They're really tisanes, Tisane, if you've ever seen that word. Tisane is a tea that doesn't have tea in it. So you have to use real tea. So white, green, or black is the rule of thumb. So white, green, and black tea all have different flavor profiles behind them. Black is very deep and earthy, and white tea is light and crisp. So I've experimented just with a bunch of different permutations of like a 3-to-2 ratio, green to black with white, and everybody kind of just lands in whatever appeals to you. So I use a 3-to-2 ratio of green to black. So you can experiment if you want to try to make your own. That the lighter the tea that you use, the lighter the kombucha will taste. But the depth of flavor that you can sometimes get that's really nice with kombucha comes from the black tea. So it's nice to incorporate that too.
What about the container? I had heard that you never use plastic because
Yeah.
that pulls the impurities and so forth, that you have to use glass.
Yeah, so kombucha is acidic. So the main problem with keeping it in plastic is acidic products tend to leach plastic molecules, especially when it's like a living thing and not just like an inert chemical. So yeah, you always want to use glass with kombucha, or not. And I also brew in ceramic containers, like porcelain containers. So anything that they call it vitrified, so it's glass-like or solid and stable, and that you know, it won't lose its molecules when it's exposed to acids.
Where did you get that container?
So I like to shop locally as much as I can, but these 1-gallon glass jars are perfect for kombucha because they are perfectly round and aren't angled whatsoever, and you can get them at Target and Walmart, which, you know. I actually called the manufacturer, Anchor Hocking, and tried to get a big order from them, and they said it's actually cheaper to buy at retail than buy at wholesale from them because of the discounts that Walmart and Target get from them. It's crazy. So if you do want to brew your own kombucha, I always recommend getting a container that's perfectly round and has the same diameter all the way up and down, because kombucha always goes to the path of least resistance, and the circle is the most efficient shape in nature. So if you have an angular jar, then the kombucha is not going to grow as rapidly or as healthily because it needs more energy to get into the corners. Yep. So if you have a perfectly circular vessel, that's the best for kombucha.
It's got to find its own.
It does, I know. It really does. It's impressive, just the way that it just keeps growing.
How did you get your start making kombucha?
I was working at a health food store in Clark Summit and discovered kombucha by getting that job at a health food store. And a girl that I was working with was making her own, and she had extra cultures and gave me one. So then I made a batch, then I made 2 batches, and then I just kept going.
How do you separate the SCOBY to start a second batch or to give one away?
Okay, so most of the time, especially if you're doing single batches like this, the mother and the daughter will grow very distinctly from one another, and the mother will sink down, the daughter will grow on top, and you're good. Sometimes though, the mother tends to float to the surface more, and I haven't been able to figure out what causes them to float, what causes them to sink. It obviously has to do with density, but I'm not sure what really lies behind that. So kombucha always grows in layers, and if you disturb kombucha and break the surface tension, then they drop again, and a new layer will grow again. So to separate them, if they're sticking together, my recommendation is to disturb it as least often as possible, so that way you have the fewest number of layers growing. And then basically, like, just clean your hands, which I washed my hands before I came in, and then you can pretty much always find a seam on it. So if you have a mother and a daughter, this one's just one culture, so I can't really demonstrate that principle, but just find the seam and wherever it's weakest, and then just reach your fingers in and just pull it apart. So it's very resilient. You can even rip these cultures in half this way, like if you just rip it in half this way instead of like by the layers, and you can just use them and give them away that way too.
Okay.
They look really pretty when you can get them in nice like smooth layers, and they look like stacked pancakes, you know. But yeah, so just don't be afraid to reach in there and take them apart with your hands. There's only certain grades of stainless steel that kombucha is compatible with, so never use stainless steel on your kombucha unless it's 304 grade, which anything that you're buying for your household kitchen is probably not 304 grade. So if you're tempted to like use a metal spoon to stir it or try to break it apart, don't use that. Use wood or something else besides metal. But yeah, your hands work great. It's just take them apart. Yeah.
What does the metal do? Like, what is
The
it?
metal oxidizes the bacteria and can kill it. Yeah.
So you make your tea, and you let it steep how long?
So if you boil a gallon of water, just bring it to a boil, let your tea steep for 30 minutes. You over steep it in order to absorb as many minerals from the tea as possible, because the bacteria need certain minerals from the tea in order to survive. So you do a 30-minute steep.
Okay, and you take it out, and you put it in the lap. You wait till like it's room temperature. You don't put it hot.
Yep, so once you finish steeping the tea for those 30 minutes, you then add your cup of sugar, stir it so everything dissolves, then you have to let it cool to room temperature. And then you can plop your culture in.
You
So,
just plop it in.
yep,
Okay.
just drop it right in, and then you just put the cloth over top and secure it with a rubber
Sit
band.
in the dark, in a nice warm place.
Yep. Yes.
And leave it
Exactly.
alone for,
Yep.
Did you say you drop a culture in there when you're making it?
Yeah, so once you steep the tea, add the sugar, and it's cooled to room temperature, you would just, take one of the cultures that you have and just put it right in. And with any other liquid that's with it, the liquid will help lower the pH and help the
What do
help
you
the culture grow properly.
Do if you're starting out and you don't have a culture?
So if you just have like a bottle of kombucha that you're using as your starter,
Okay.
then you would just pour the whole bottle in.
Got you.
Yep. If you want to try to start from a bottle of kombucha, I would recommend using 2 bottles because it's just to try to increase the chances that the culture will be viable. The more kombucha that you add to the sweet tea, the lower the pH will get, and therefore increasing the chances that the bacteria will grow properly.
Do you recommend using the original or plain to start out, like if you
Yes.
were gonna,
Yep.
instead of a flavored
Yeah, you
one?
can use it. I've gotten it to work, and my friends have gotten it to work if you use like strawberry, but it's much more challenging to try to use a flavored one for your starter because you have like carryover, and the culture just doesn't grow quite as well. So yes, if you can get your hands on an original, that's the best one to use for starter.
You just leave the cultures in there? I mean, you just, like if you want to
Yeah.
make another batch, after you drank that, then you want to make another
So they're
batch.
called SCOBY hotels, and I have a bunch of them now. So yeah, you can just stack them all together. So like, let's say you get brewing kombucha, and all of a sudden you find you have like 8 extra cultures on hand. You can just put all 8 of them in a jar, and as long as you can fully submerge them with kombucha, and they all stay moist, they'll all just like hang out there in the hotel, and eventually that kombucha that they're suspended in will turn to vinegar because they'll just keep fermenting and the pH completely drops. And over time, they'll begin to dry out because they're going to be using up the liquid that's in there. So just as long as you keep adding kombucha to it every couple months, then you can have a hotel and somewhat indefinitely maintain your kombucha cultures and just have them on hand.
You can add tea to it, you don't have to add actual kombucha each time.
To your hotel?
Yeah, in the hotel.
Sweet tea or kombucha tea.
Either one.
Yeah, either one. Yep. If you add sweet tea to it, you're probably going to get another daughter growing on top because they'll get excited and they'll have another food source.
I wonder if 5 of them would make 5 daughters.
They don't, no.
They just make one.
Yep, that's so that's another like mystery behind it. So it's like at the, I should probably just leave this off. It's not a big deal. Right at the surface of the liquid, that's where the daughter always grows. So if you add 5 cultures to a batch, you won't get 5 daughters. You get 1, but they'll ferment more quickly. But then you have less liquid when you're done, so it's a trade-off.
Have you ever eaten?
Yeah.
How much do you eat at a time, and how did that work out?
They're really hard to eat when they get, because they're like so leathery, but when they're thin and kind of translucent, they're just kind of like slimy, like you can just like throw it back and drink it. But I have broken it off, and they're really hard to chew, but I've actually taken them and thrown them in a blender, and you kind of can make a probiotic smoothie that way. And it has a acidic, like sharp flavor to it, so it's, instead of your smoothie tasting really sweet, it'll be more vinegary. But yeah, I've done that before just to make, probiotic smoothies.
And everything stayed okay, like?
Yeah, no hospital runs or anything. Yeah.
Besides the probiotics, the bacteria, what are the other, I mean, I see on the bottle, the ones
Yeah.
that I buy, it says polyphenols and all that enzymes.
Sure.
What all does it produce?
Yep. The main things are B vitamins are created by the yeast, which are great for energy. And after you drink a lot and smoke a lot, you deplete B vitamins. So people can use kombucha for hangovers because you're replacing those B vitamins, and also B vitamins just help with overall energy. So the probiotics, beneficial bacteria, the B vitamins. Additionally, it creates glucosamine through the glucuronic acid that's produced. So some people, because of the enzymes and the glucosamine, can help can find relief for inflammation for some people. Oh yeah, and the enzymes that are created are from the yeast and bacteria fermentation that are found in all like raw foods, like even vegetables, fruits. So they all have a certain amount of enzymes in them. And so because kombucha is raw, it has those enzymes that help stimulate cellular reactions in the body, which can just promote overall well-being and health in that regard. So those are the main things. And then there's a bunch of other stuff in kombucha too, in very small amounts, but those are the main ones. Yeah.
What are the indications that what you're growing isn't good?
Man, such a good question. So, green and black are the colors to avoid. So like you can tell, like there's a lot of brown tone to this and beige. So the cultures when they first grow, they're like pretty porcelain color, pretty white, but they do kind of turn brown over time because of the yeast. And brown's okay, or like beige. But if you ever have a culture and you're looking down on top and you can see literal like green mold that if you like sometimes it's the same kind of green mold that grows on bread that doesn't have preservatives, and then black as well. That is an indication that something has contaminated the culture and that you shouldn't drink it. So sometimes when you're first starting out, you might like, this is a weird color or whatever, but it's the green and black, and it's pretty noticeable because it's got that mold aspect.
And they'll be on top normally.
Yeah. Yep. And if it ever tastes rancid, then obviously avoid it. Just that typical food safety. The other thing to watch out for is fruit flies in the summer. Winter is great because you don't have to worry about any fruit flies because it keeps your kombucha warm. But in the summer, when the fruit flies go crazy, they love kombucha. And I didn't realize until about a year ago that fruit flies don't eat sugar; they eat yeast. And so they love kombucha because all the sugar that's there attracts so much yeast, then they try to get in there. And then because kombucha, the cultures solidify at the top, it's a perfect place for them to lay eggs while they're eating. So like it's awesome for them. So just keep the best thing to do is to just keep the cloths on top and rubber band it tightly. If you're ever brewing a batch and you accidentally get kombucha on your cloth because you like just dropped it, like discard that cloth and get a new one, because if there's any liquid on the cloth, it'll attract the fruit flies and they somehow magically get in when it's wet. That happened to me once and it's just like all these fruit flies got in there. I don't know what happened. And then you can make traps too to get rid of fruit flies. The best way to do it, let's see. Do you guys, yeah, I'll just explain it to you because it's cool. So if you just take like a jar, like if you just got a 16-ounce glass jar and put kombucha in it, or raw apple cider vinegar, or wine, anything that fruit flies like, and just put a piece of plastic saran wrap over top of it, and just poke holes in it with a toothpick, and they'll go in there and they can't get out. So that's the best fruit fly trap that I've ever made. It's been very effective if you ever have fruit fly.
Does that work for ants as well?
I've had good luck with diatomaceous earth with ants. Yeah. Yeah. Do you guys want to try any more flavors of kombucha? I can just like pour you guys some.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, sure, I'd like to try more.
Up front, we're sampling strawberry, mango, and turmeric ginger, and then I also brought raspberry, blueberry, the ginger, and you guys had the original. So.
Did you ever try like flavors like something like for health reasons, like broccoli or something?
So yeah, I actually haven't done any vegetable flavors yet, but people I know do beets and carrots. I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they have some natural sugars in them, so it would be harmonious with the kombucha in that regard. And the only major thing you have to watch out for are oils. So like if you wanted to do like a mint kombucha, the oils from mint leaves can be detrimental to the health of the bacteria inside. So you don't want to use too much. Like if you just use a little, then that'd be fine. But yeah.
Well, what about the green? I mean, I've bought the green
Oh yeah.
all kinds of chlorella and
Sure.
whatever it is. Yeah,
Yep.
spirulina. How do you make that? Do you have
Yeah, you would
buy
have
that
to-
powdered and put it in, or?
Yeah, I would think so. I've never made a green one before. For the most part, you have to dry out the algae type stuff or you have to like ship it like frozen. But yeah, you would just get the dried powder, I believe, and you would just put some in. Since I haven't done it before, I don't know how much is a good amount to recommend, but yeah, you could. I've seen people do that before with the powders. You can just add them in.
With the turmeric ginger one that you use, do you use the root of, I'm assuming, of both as opposed to using a powder?
Yeah. Technically it's the rhizome, but yeah. So I just get the fresh chunks and I puree them and just add them. So if you want to add stuff to the kombucha, usually the finer it is, the more readily the yeast can eat all the sugars. So if you can just throw it through a blender or food processor and then pour it in, that's usually the best way to do it.
How many years have you been making kombucha for?
A little over 3 years.
And how many batches do you think you've made? Thousands?
Yeah, definitely. I've probably made like 10,000 gallons of kombucha in my life so far.
I saw on your website, there was the pictures of all the crocks, like, with the spigots on.
Oh yeah, yep. Forgot to talk about that.
Are those spigots, what are they metal or plastic or?
Yeah, those ones are plastic. It's less than ideal because it's plastic, but they're hard plastic. And then it's like a silicone ring on the inside, so the silicone's stable. Okay. And so as long as so I use a porcelain container and it has a spigot on it, so that's called continuous brewing, as opposed to single batch brewing. So with those containers, I never drain out all of the kombucha. I always leave some in there. So then that way, when I start the next batch, it's already about 50% fermented that way. So I cut down on half the time. So if I have like 100 ounces of kombucha in a container, I drain out 50 ounces of kombucha, replace that 50 with 50 ounces of sweet tea, and then it would only take me 1 week instead of 2 weeks to get back to full fermentation. So that's a really cool way to get into it. If you are making a lot of kombucha, you can get a porcelain vessel that has a spigot on it, and then you'll just like get this gigantic SCOBY that just keeps growing inside of it. Like the layers all just like stick together, and then old layers go on the bottom, new layers go on top. So periodically just pull off the old layers and compost them, and the new ones just keep growing. And it's just like, I've had the same cultures for like 2 years in some of them, and they just keep growing and stay healthy. Yeah.
Did you notice that when do you compost some of yours?
Yeah.
Do you notice that?
Compost all of it.
Do you notice that the compost like picks up an activity once you add that to it? Or
yeah, it does. I have a lot, so I feel like it's like a little bit too much sometimes, and then mine gets pretty acidic because I have fruit too that I'm throwing in there. But yeah, definitely, especially when I first started doing it, like I noticed that it was great. Yeah.
Oh, so using it to then compost near like blueberries and other acidic, like, and tomatoes and stuff like that would actually be good since they need more acidic soil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly. Yep. Yeah, it works out great. Like it's pretty cool. Like when I make a lot of kombucha. Like I can make like about 65 gallons of kombucha a week, and I don't generate much trash because most of it can just go right into the ground and compost. So it's been really cool, and we've linked up with a lot of farmers in the area too. So it's been a nice like cycle to be able to use local ingredients from the farmers, like strawberries from Honesdale, and then yeah, I can compost a lot of it too. So it's a pretty sustainable type beverage to incorporate.
How do you, without contaminating it, and you want to drink it, how do you get that out without contaminating it? What do you use? You can't use a...
Yeah, so honestly, when I first started, and I was just brewing it for myself, I just washed my hands whenever I would reach in and just pull them out, and it's cool. No,
but I mean to drink what you've made. How do you, that's something you can drink, right? Once you made it?
What, if I reach my hands in it? Is that what you mean?
I guess I don't understand about it at all.
Are you gonna pour it out of there, or are you gonna ladle it out, or?
So if this is ready and you're ready to bottle it up, you just just pour it out. So I have you
have to lift that up and pour it into a cup or something, a mug, if you want to drink it.
Or you can brew in a smaller vessel. So if you got like a quart jar, you
can't really dip anything in there to get it out. Like say if you were
soup, now I understand what you're asking. You could use a ladle and like scoop it out one at a time. But the easiest thing to do is to get one of those half-gallon cake batter Pyrex things that have the big handle on them, and that's what I use. So you can fit half a gallon in one of those things, and then you can fill up 4 bottles with it pretty easily. They get a little bit heavy, but
Is that a type of ladle, like a glass ladle? Is that what you're talking?
No, I would just, so if you had kombucha ready, and I have that like pouring vessel that has a spout on it, and then I would just pour this into the spout, the one that has the spout, so then that way I could easily pour it into a bottle that has a small opening like this. Or if you're using a mason jar that's wide mouth, you could just pour it straight in from your fermenting vessel into the mason jar because it has a wider mouth.
Guess I get it.
Yeah.
Speaking of mason jars, if you were to pour them into mason jars or any other jars that you have, like, do you have to be aware of the metal lid? Will it start to eat the
Yeah,
metal?
well, the mason jars, because they have that plastisol lining on the bottom, but eventually they'll start to rust. Like if you ever stuck something in the fridge with the mason jar, like it'll rust over time. So yeah, as long as you can like keep the liquid off of it as much as possible, I found that that's the best for the mason jars. Yeah, but they seal really nice and tight.
On
So.
here, what's underneath? Are they wax underneath there too?
They call it plastisol, so it's like this like kind of plasticky, waxy type thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you use the fruit, do you only use the fresh, or do you use, or would frozen be okay?
I use frozen, yeah, because fresh or frozen works. And I actually had never done dried fruit, but some people use dried as well. Like strawberries have a lot of water content in them, that kind of thing. Same with mangoes, so you could get dried mangoes to try that. Yeah, so kombucha is really forgiving in that regard: fresh, dried, frozen. Yep.
And I would think that the dry would be better, because there'd be more sugar in the dry.
Concentrated, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet.